came to Florida as a young boy, and my grandmother lived down in Miami, so I got to know the state a little bit. We would make a yearly pilgrimage down to visit Graham and my father's brother who lived in Hialeah. So I knew Florida as a youngster, but I had an opportunity to travel all across the United States and much of Europe when I traveled touring with the Harlem Globetrotter Show, which I did a couple of years after college. One of the places I played was the Leaky Teepee in West Palm Beach. And I knew of West Palm, I had visited here, loved the area, and after seeing most of our country, and I was in love with Florida always, and very happy to take a chance and move down here in 1979. Wellington, when I first arrived in 1978 to play a round of golf at the old course at Palm Beach Polo and Country Club, was the absolute middle of nowhere. I enjoyed my round of golf and said to my partners, you know, great place, but I would never come back here again. It's so far out, and there's nothing out here. But of course, a year later in 1979, when I had the opportunity to come out and take my first job in Florida working at the Wellington Club as the original beverage manager of the club up on the hill. I fell in love with the place and stayed for the next 40 years. Mm-hmm. It took my wife to drag me out kicking and screaming. I did not want to leave. I was so embedded in the community. It was so much a part of my life. But she had a vision. She had retired from teaching. She had spent the last 25 years at Royal Palm Beach High School, which she was an opening teacher there, and she had taught at Wellington High. But she finally retired from teaching, and I said, what do you want to do now? And she said, I want to play golf and tennis every day the rest of my life. So we moved up to East Point, up in Palm Beach Gardens, where we were now 2 miles from my restaurant, which I still own and operate, Stadium Grill in Abacoa. And more importantly, my son and his 4 children, my grandchildren, live just a couple of minutes from our home, and we get to spend a lot more time with them. Back when we started in Wellington, we were an unincorporated part of the county run by the Acme Improvement District. We had no local government other than that. We certainly weren't a village or a city at that time, but it was such an exciting time to be here with the birth of a community, and it was such a wonderful place to raise a family. I brought up my 4 sons here, and everything was new. It was a chance to start things fresh, and we developed such a wonderful community together. It was just wonderful to be a part of the growth of that. Mm-hmm. I was immediately immersed in the community with my first employment as a bartender up on the hill, the Wellington Club. We opened New Year's Eve, 1979, and the club was such a focal point for the community. Everyone gathered there, and you got to know all of your neighbors there, and everyone rallied around the old bar, and I got the privilege of serving all of the fine people and got to know all of the early pioneers, the people who had just moved here. We were only a couple thousand strong, and new things were happening, new clubs were forming, and shortly afterward I had the great pleasure of opening my restaurant here in Wellington, which became an instant hit, an institution. It was the Cheers of Wellington, Cobblestone's restaurant, in 1982. And as the owner of the local gathering spot, I became involved in every charity that came to town. Everybody would come through an open door and ask for a hand, and I never learned to say no. So I was very pleased to participate in so many different charities that came to Wellington, and it was just a great opportunity that I really enjoyed. In 1982, when I opened, we had no voice in the county, and a group of us decided that the best way to accomplish that was by starting a Chamber of Commerce. So we held some early organizational meetings in Cobblestones as the gathering place, and a group of us started the Palms West Chamber of Commerce shortly after I opened the restaurant, and it was very successful. Our goal was to bring together all of the Western communities, so we had people come in from Royal Palm Beach and Loxahatchee and the surrounding area as well. We didn't have many businesses in Wellington in those days. When I opened my restaurant in '82, prior to that there was only one shopping center in the town, one traffic light and a two-lane road. And when the town center opened, the retail component of the village finally got started. And the old Wellington Mall opened at the same time. So all of a sudden we had the beginnings of a commercial development here in town. And it gave us, with the Chamber, the ability to come together and work together to accomplish many of the shared goals that we had at the time. I decided that the community needed a parade. I had grown up participating in parades. I walked in the parades back when I was a youth in New Jersey as a Boy Scout, and one of my favorite memories was marching with my dad with the Knights of Columbus in a parade in New Brunswick, New Jersey, with all of the guys in their dress-up attire and the fourth-degree knights with their plumes, and it was just exciting. And I remember as a kid running down to the end of the block to see the parades coming by each year, and how much that inspired me as a kid. And I thought what a great thing it would be for Wellington. So I wrestled with my chamber board members to start the event. And I remember we were meeting in the old Wellington Club up in what I believe was the Palm Room, and meeting some resistance, and everybody was like, oh, I don't know, it's a big task. And here it was, our July board meeting, and they wanted to end the meeting and table the idea. And I went and blocked the door, and I said, wait a second, guys. If we don't do this today, we're never going to pull it off for December. So I need you to give me your support, and I'll put this thing together. And I had an ally in Sharon Edelman Rubin, who felt as strongly about the idea as I did. And the two of us said, we'll tackle it, we'll take care of it. And I got the board to approve at that July meeting, and several months later, in December of '83, we started our parade, and I acted as chairman. And one of the things I was most proud of was I got to lay out the parade route and figure out the logistics of the staging and dispersal and so on. And to this day, 38 years later, I believe it is, we still use the same route as we have every year since. So it was my baby. It was a child to me, and I shepherded it, and loved it and just enjoyed every minute of it. Every year it was one of the highlights of my year. So I'm really, really happy that the community has embraced it as much as they have, and it continues to be such a wonderful event for our community. You know, the most obvious change here in the community is the explosion, not only of the population, but of the retail development. When I first came out here, Route 441 was absolute jungle. There was no development whatsoever. There was one retail establishment. There was a garden center, and you could buy some fruits and vegetables, and they had an alligator in a pond, and it sat just south of Forest Hill Boulevard. From Okeechobee Boulevard all the way down to Boca, there was nothing else on 441. And now when I drive down that corridor and see what's happened since the Wellington Mall came along and all the development that's come with it, it's phenomenal. Of course, the population going from 3,000 to this area supporting well over 100,000 people now is dramatic. The change in the roads. We used to have to drive out on Forest Hill Boulevard, 2-lane road, and it seemed to take forever to get from the East Coast. I was working in Palm Beach some at the time and down in West Palm, and that hike back and forth on Forest Hill was an eternity. So seeing the improvement to the road system, the widenings, seeing Southern Boulevard today is just mind-boggling. So been a lot of change. From the early days, when I first moved out here in the early 80s, there was no representation of the Wellington, what we now call the Western communities, on a county or state level, certainly not the national level that it's risen to now with the growth of the equestrian. But we were lacking representation, we were lacking a political voice, we had no political clout, we couldn't get the things done that we needed to politically. And it was self-evident to the residents that we needed a stronger political voice, and everyone was strongly in favor of incorporating the community. I think it was an easy sell because we wanted to have some political power in the county, and I think we accomplished that with our early chamber days, but certainly when the town finally incorporated, we achieved that goal. Wellington was the home to many, many celebrities from the earliest days due to the polo aspect of Wellington. My restaurant, Cobblestones, was visited by incredible celebrities at the time. I had a celebrity that was one of the top women in the world at the time, Zsa Zsa Gabor. And Zsa Zsa became a customer in the restaurant and enjoyed having her there. Her secretary called me one day and said, Zsa Zsa would like to come in tomorrow. She'd like her regular table. And I said, of course, we're happy to have Miss Gabor. And she said, well, she wants to bring a guest. And I said, Zsa Zsa can bring whoever she wants. And she said, well, she wants to bring Fifi. I said, whoever. Well, Zsa Zsa showed up the next day with her dog. And I had a strict rule in the restaurant, no pets allowed. But we made an exception that day. Zsa Zsa sat at her regular table with Fifi on her lap. But her friend Merv Griffin, who was probably the biggest male celebrity in television at the time, he had his own show, and he was the producer of numerous shows. And Merv became a regular customer. In fact, I got to play tennis with Merv over at Palm Beach Polo Club. But we had people, just incredible celebrities. Paul Newman came in with his wife. Of course, their daughter was participating in the horse show. And to have Paul Newman, who is the biggest movie star in the world, sitting up at your table, I was just so excited. And I remember Mr. Newman getting up to go to the men's room, and I said, I better stand here and stand by the door and make sure nobody bothers him. And I did, and Paul came out, and I said, I hope everything's okay, Mr. Newman. And he looked at me and he said, great chow, man. And I remember that compliment to this day. It was so exciting for me. But Robin Leach of the Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and Linda Blair had just made her famous movie where she spun her head around the, can't remember that one. But the celebrities that came from Palm Beach to the Polo Club, every Sunday there would be a trek of Rolls Royces coming out from the island, and no bigger than the day that Prince Charles, and Princess Diana came to Wellington. And we were in the crowd that day, and Diana was just the princess to not only England, but I think the whole world admired her and her story. And Charles out on his polo pony galloping up and down was just a regal sight, and everyone was so excited, and we got to mingle in the crowd and get pretty close up to them, and it was a wonderful royal experience for Wellington that day. Polo was such an important part of Wellington. It really what put us on the map. Bill Ildesacker had the dream and created the polo, and it was before we had any horse shows in Wellington. We were strictly a polo community. And one of the things that was wonderful about Cobblestones, my restaurant, was it was a place where the polo players, the owners of the teams, and the grooms would all sit together and enjoy a drink at the bar and sit and enjoy a meal together. It was really a wonderful gathering place. And we had all great polo names. Memo Garcia was a great customer of mine. I had a Memo story. He would sit in the restaurant and eat his lunch, but he would drink Diet Coke after Diet Coke, and we were charging 50 cents a Diet Coke back then. And Memo got his bill and he charged me for 4 Diet Cokes, $2. I said, yeah, that's what we charge. He's like, no, I want free refills. And I remember taking out my business card and writing, Memo Garcia entitled to free refills forever. And Memo carried that card with him, and every time he'd come in the restaurant, he'd pull it out and show it to his waitress and enjoy his free refills. But polo was such a huge part of our community, and the original Polo Stadium was just a mecca. And soon after the horse show finally showed up to town, Gene Misch came in and started a 2-week show in February, and it was huge because it brought a whole nother equestrian component to the town. But it took a few years for it to catch on the way that it did. Wellington has such wonderful memories for me because of the wonderful community it was and continues to be. The sense of community was remarkable. It had the small town flavor. All the neighbors seemed to know each other. It was friendly. Everybody just got along. It was a safe place. And the sense of community is the biggest characteristic that I carry from Wellington. And I just feel so blessed that I found it when I did, and I got to be a part of it and enjoyed every minute of it.